That's the key to it. You got to give a little bit more than the other guy.
Now, now at that period, right at the turn, first couple years into the 30s, Hoover was president up till 32. And what was his method of dealing with the depression?
Well, you see, we weren't very old.
Right, might be asking me like about Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, yes.
Well, we were older.
Nobody liked him.
We were older than that,
yeah.
but you see, we weren't saturated with news. All we got was a newspaper.
Yeah.
One
Or
newspaper.
the newsreel.
And it wasn't delivered.
Well,
If we saw
it cost 2 bits to go see the newsreel, so the paper, which was a nickel or 3 cents, you could read it, but kids don't read the newspapers very much.
But there was a Tribune in San Diego and the Union. No, not the Tribune. Yeah, there was a Tribune and the Sun and the Union in San Diego. But we very seldom saw them out here.
So perhaps on a national level,
We
what was going on in Washington?
We weren't too much aware of it until Roosevelt began putting in his social programs.
Right.
And then my father stood up and screamed and pulled his hair.
Now, were you paying federal? Do you know if you were paying federal taxes before that?
No.
I don't think there were federal
Not
taxes.
until about 1936, I think.
I don't know.
No, we didn't pay income tax until after 36, I think, after 37, somewhere in there.
Well, was it because we didn't make enough money, or because there wasn't one?
Well, I don't think it was instituted. I don't think it had
I don't know.
come into being yet.
Well, I know that
We paid state and county taxes.
I should know this, but I don't. One of the constitutional amendments legalized federal income tax, so it was that big of a deal when it happened. But I think it was legalized, so to speak, much earlier in the 1910s or 20s or so, but it wasn't implemented on a real grand scale
until the 30s. Yeah.
Probably just for very high income people, and there weren't very many of them.
Right. Now at that period, when you are a young couple and working in 35, you were doing what when you were married?
I was working for the Union Oil Company, driving a truck.
Big tank.
It had solid tires, and I was the youngest.
Solid tires.
Solid tires, yeah.
No rubber tires.
Well, it's solid rubber. That's what it was. It wasn't the pneumatic. The other trucks had pneumatic tires, and they were building a dam, Rodriguez Dam, down south of Tijuana, down in Mexico, and they were buying the gasoline from our station in Chula Vista, which was the closest station. And I was chosen to drive that whole rickety truck with those solid tires clear down to that dam down there.
Now you said our station. That was.
Well, the station where I worked. Okay. See, the substation they call it of the big headquarters station.
So it wasn't a service station.
No, it wasn't a
storage
station. It was a
station.
That's right, storage. They had big tanks for storage for delivery to the service stations. Gasoline was 10, 15 cents a gallon, something like that.
So at that time, you're driving the truck, and Roosevelt is going crazy all over the country trying to pass. I know a little bit about this through work in school with Roosevelt trying to pass a lot of programs, and the Supreme Court saying no.
Yeah, the canon passes through.
Right. He said you can't set minimum wage, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. What did you think at that time with this president who was really kind of going nuts with social programs?
Well, it goes into something that is in both of our backgrounds, and that is the liquor problem. It was beer, and that was one of the first things that he put into the law, that you could have beer.
Was the idea to legalize it and tax it?
Yes.
Did the country go into an alcoholic binge after that, or?
Well, I don't remember that, but it's just that Roosevelt was in favor of alcohol, and my family was not in favor of alcohol. That's what it was.
And he was in favor of freer trade, and we've been brought up with more protectionism.
Isolationism.
Yeah, and protective trade, and also his programs were so socialized that
Was that the word that was used? Do you remember?
I don't remember socialization.
my father
It
used
would have been very,
my,
I think, but on an official level, they would have been very wary of that
Well,
word.
yeah, well,
I'm
that
not sure that there was a stigma against the word. I don't remember
No.
that.
Social Security, obviously, the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes, he wanted to have cradle to the grave security.
Right, and that's the exact
Everyone.
terminology, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And my family, my father especially, Daddy just riled at that. Oh boy, because here he had started this dairy with 2 cows,
Right. You're saying I've worked my life to give myself.
and my family,
Right.
and I don't want it taken away from me to give to
Right.
whoever.
Now, family was Republican.
Well, I guess the word, yes. I turned out to be a Republican, but I don't remember any talk about Republican or Democrat or Socialist or anything in my family.
What about you?
Oh yes, mine were all the Republicans.
So,
Proclaimed, exclaimed.
see, because, Roosevelt, at that period, which we're going to get into in just a sec, across the whole world, there was these so-called great reform leaders, Hitler and Stalin and Roosevelt. You can even think of a picture at Yalta with Roosevelt and Stalin. Those very, very famous photographs of them all together. In your minds, has he just been a sort of figurehead more than an actual? Did his personality, so to speak, and his the ability of his personality to endear, for me, Roosevelt was the great man who saved the country.
Yeah.
Who saved the country from the Depression by instituting these great programs in which the government
Gave all.
right, in which the government finally said
Yeah.
that we are
Turn
going
rich
to,
and give to the
right,
poor.
right.
Well, obviously he was very popular because he's the only man that's ever been elected
He
for
was,
Right.
he was a charmer.
But
Yes,
but
absolutely.
see, that's what I'm saying. Was it the father, the great, big fatherly image, or
Yes.
what did it?
And he had the radio
Right, fireside chats.
yes,
Right?
and the fireside chats
Oh,
and
yes.
my friends,
Sure.
Oh, his PR.
made it sound as though he was
But-
right in every family.
Yeah.
Is it possible that he was simply at that period? Because right then in the 30s, we saw the ability of the newsreel and the radio.
Yes.
You look at what Hitler did, and
Yes.
Hitler took full
Yeah,
advantage of
sure.
the mass communication. And it seems that Roosevelt did all he could.
Absolutely.
He did,
too.
he
He was
did.
the pioneer.
He did.
So do you think that maybe, when Cortez came to the Mayans, Cortez came down on his horse, in his white skin, and the Mayans, take
Right,
take
father.
everything.
They thought he was God.
Sure. And so I'm, looking back at the specter of Roosevelt, so to speak, and maybe he was just the first
Roosevelt,
technology god, the first leader to really take advantage of really going into people's homes, through that radio.
no, he did.
It was such a new technique, you see,
Sure.
to have the chief man in
And the
the
fireside
whole
chats.
country talking
Oh,
to
yes.
you right in your own room.
Yeah.
But he, as far as the popularity goes, did most Americans, do you think, working people or what have you, think that was a good thing?
Oh yes. Oh
There's
yes.
no question.
The
about it.
masses.
The
The masses,
sure.
the working people and the unions and all of them. And they thought that was great. But people who had vision and who were the backbone and the workers and the real thinkers
Sure.
saw through it.
Was there a period, even almost of anti-intellectualism going on at that time? Anti-individualism, do you think?
Anti-individualism.
I don't remember anything of that kind. I don't think so.
Not amongst
Trying
anyone.
to pit class against class.
Right, that's
That's what's going on right
I
now.
don't think so. That's
No, I don't think that was so much because we still didn't have the communication that we have now. Even though it was creeping in, it wasn't quite like it is today.
Well, we didn't have the cross communication. The communication was controlled by
One way, it seems.
yes, and so the common people really didn't get much chance to talk. But
Right.
here again, remember they voted for Roosevelt time and time again.
Sure.
So his message was getting to them, and they were approving of it.
Mm-hmm.
My friend, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself.
Right.
That's a famous phrase.
Mothers of America, I say to you, no American son shall die on foreign soil. And bango, we're in the war.
All right, we're gonna get into that too. Right now we're in the
never
30s,
forget
but we're about to get into the 40s.
Yeah, you're gonna have to move along. That camera's running
I
down.
know. I think I started this at 2:35. We'll be all right. Wait, that's how long is that one tape though?
1 hour.
1 hour. Did you time us right when we started?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, but it says on the thing.
Yeah.
Well, the 30s in a nutshell were pretty,
You go ahead. I'll check it.
were pretty flamboyant, I think.
And one of the most flamboyant would have been Hitler.
Oh, well, he was coming out.
Right, in 1933,
Oh, yeah.
Hitler was
Oh, yeah.
elected into power in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what did you all hear about?
Well, I happened to be in State College at that time, and I had a professor, a political science professor, who was very astute. And I'll never forget, we had a lecture the day that the England and France allowed Mussolini to go through the Suez Canal into Ethiopia to quell, what was that little lion king's name?
Yeah.
Haile Selassie.
Haile Selassie.
Yeah, that's right.
And
The Lion of Judah.
And I remember Dr. Leonard said, this is opening the floodgate. All England and France had to do was to send their warships and say no. And blockade the Suez Canal, not allow them to go through. He says, this gives them license to do whatever they want. They know now that the Allies will do nothing. And it was so prophetic because from then on, they couldn't be stopped.
Right.
And Hitler became bolder and bolder and plowed right over Clement Attlee and Chamberlain. Oh gosh, yeah.
But when you heard about this, you'd go see the newsreels, right? Or you'd hear it on the radio. New German leader. Was he the bad guy? He wasn't the bad guy right at the start, was he? You know what I mean?
He wasn't given much credence, was he?
Mussolini?
No.
Hitler.
And Hitler.
Oh, Hitler. No, he was kind of laughed at first, and he surprised everybody.
The militarism that, I mean, America was coming off and a huge war previously in which America had said through the Treaty of Versailles to Germany, you're not to raise your voice.
No military at all was allowed.
And Hitler comes out in the jackboots in the full military.
Yeah, but he had laid his plans previously with that. I mean, he was surreptitiously arming, and I don't think our country paid any attention to it. I don't think any of us paid much attention to it.
Europe was
Until
a long
suddenly.
way away, right?
I think that's the case.
What about the Japanese at that time? Same thing, probably.
Well, we didn't pay any attention
Well,
to
the
it.
Japanese produced what were generally regarded as just cheap, shoddy imitations of everything else. You know, you could buy all
back then it was
made in Japan. Always indicated at that time, well, it couldn't be much good. You know,
real junky things.
yeah, just junky things that came over
We
here.
paid no attention to Japan. They were still in the trees.
Right. Now, when Hitler did start to really move and was moving into Czechoslovakia and basically marching into Austria and really spreading out, was the country, from my understanding of the history, was still very isolationist and did not want anything to do with that. Now,
That's
I
true.
think that's a fair sort of
description
of the late 30s there.
That's true. That's true. And yes. And when Hitler first moved up into Danzig, up the corridor through Poland, there was hardly a ripple through the country.
But it was news and knowledge that this
But boy,
Yeah, but that was clear over in Europe, you know.
Right.
They could do what they wanted over there. We were.
I think I was the only one that was upset about all that. I remember.
Well, you'd learned about
I
international politics in school.
yeah, I still had that year
Had
with
a-
Dr. Leonard,
I had a special interest in it.
and
Because you expected to go to Europe sometime.
But you later did. Quite a bit, right?
yeah.
That's travel. We got that. That'll be on tape too.
Yeah, well, you've got 15
Well-
minutes more.
Okay.
Um,
But during that late 30s, you know, when the axis gets formed between Japan and Italy and Germany,
yeah.
when did Roosevelt, obviously your quote he had given, you know, a
That
minute
was
ago,
that was about the time he quoted that. I think it was about the time that we had begun the Lend-Lease program to England.
right, the metal and
Ships
armaments, right,
and he was. You see, we really didn't come out of the Depression until we began helping in the war effort over there.
and that is what Roosevelt's ulterior motive may have been for getting
Of
into
course,
the war.
of course.
Is that a legit? Was
That's
the country aware of that?
I was.
I think a lot of
We
people
were.
were, yes.
Yeah, we were.
Yes.
See, that sounds so bizarre to me. To enter into a war for economic reasons.
Of course.
Yeah,
he
but I don't
wasn't-
think he expected to do fighting. He wanted to provide all the arms and all
Wanted
that
to
stuff.
sell the guns.
Yeah,
But
he
that was-
wanted to make the money and profiteer from it, but it doesn't work that way.
Right. So during that period, right preceding Pearl Harbor, Russia was what? Russia was the bad guy or the good guy or the strange guy
The
or
sleeping bear.
sleeping bear. They were they the enemy?
No,
Well, I don't-
not to us. No.
I don't remember Russia as being either friend or foe. It was
well,
just a huge country
I
over there
I
on the
have
other
to-
side of Germany.
Do you know if it was open? Was it could you go have a week in Stalingrad if you wanted to?
Well, the Russian Revolution, of course,
1917.
was along about the same time as the war, you see, and that's when communism came in and took hold and closed them up.
Sure.
But it was a country like the other countries.
It was very difficult to get into Russia. I don't think it would have been possible. It was closed. The borders were closed. It kept everything in. No one really knew what was going on there. As far as we knew, I mean, we didn't think about it. The only thinking we ever did was about Russia. There was a Bolshevik group out here in Bonita.
A what?
A Bolshevik.
Group?
Did you ever heard of a Bolshevik?
Of course. Was there a group or a party or
It was a
something?
family.
The Bolsheviki was a group in Russia that
Well, they were the
were
ones.
the ones that wanted
started.
to fight
Sure.
in this revolution.
There was an actual Russian family who lived here, or there were a bunch
No,
of
they were
American
Americans. They were
Sympathizers.
local people who were sympathizers, and they were the Bolshevikis. And one of them, the father of the family, used to go to my dad's dairy barn and talk to my father and the milkers, who would be 3 or 4 guys would be milking the cows, and that's a process that takes about 3 hours in the evening, late afternoon. And he'd come down there and tell them everything that was wrong with the country, how everything had to be communal, everything had to be owned by the state, and to each his own according to his needs. And you're not supposed to have a Buick automobile. We're all to drive a certain kind of an automobile. We're all supposed to have a certain income. We're all supposed to have business.
Now, were there millions of Americans who thought that, or was there one guy
No.
in Bonita who thought that?
No, there weren't millions. No. That was just an
He
isolated.
was a crank then, right?
No, he
just
wasn't a crank. He
Well,
had a daughter who was teaching in the San Diego schools, and she and her husband were both Bolsheviks.
Would there have been any
There-
repression against
No.
somebody holding those views at that time?
No, everybody laughed about it.
Right.
But he was serious, and everyone knew he was serious. And we all knew that that's what was happening in Russia. But it can't happen here.
Sure.
That was the attitude.
The Bonita Bolshevik.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're leaving the 30s and we're heading down into 1940 and specifically 1941, and suddenly the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor and everything goes
Those
180.
bonkers.
I mean, it seems like the attitude prior to that was that is a European problem and we don't want to get back into that.
Yeah, we're just shaking ourselves off of the depression.
Sure, minding our own business for the most part, and things were going on just fine. And all of a sudden, we were in a war, and it was
We
a
were attacked.
terrible thing. Attacked like that. Of course, that roused the whole country immediately.
Right.
And they did just everyone then wanted to put their shoulder to the wheel and get America armed because we weren't armed. We weren't ready at all. My word, if the Japanese, I read, if the Japanese had wanted to, they could have landed on the coast
We
and done
expected
anything they
it.
wanted.
Right.
And
Yes, we did.
We expected it. And we were petrified.
And there
'Cause
were
we
a
knew
few
they
submarines that did shoot into the
Yeah, I've
coastal
heard that.
cities.
Is that legit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Goleta. Yeah.
In Santa Barbara.
Yeah, up in that area.
Now, what about the internment of Japanese people?
Well, in retrospect, it was a terrible thing, but at the time, you see, their peace ambassador was in Washington at the time that they attacked.
Right.
And so it just made everyone distrust them completely.
But prior to that, they had not been.
No, true. But all of a sudden, Japan and every Japanese was an enemy. And we had good Japanese friends here, wonderful, hardworking people that were here, that were personal friends of Marian and of all of us, schoolmates
We
in
went to
school.
school with Japanese people.
But all of a sudden, the government decided that these people were all at least potential spies. And so they just confiscated everything they had. That may not be the right word. They gathered them up and shipped them away, and they had to dispose of their goods, whatever they had, automobiles, houses, whatever.
And of course, the guy with the store next to the Japanese store knew the guy had to sell it.
Yeah, so it gives him $50 and moves into the store.
But wasn't, I mean, personally, to have friends who were rounded up like animals and put into.
We didn't figure that way. We didn't figure that like animals.
No. There were concentration camps, and we figured that Americans are humane and that they take care of these people. We've heard some stories since that maybe in some places they weren't.
Right.
But a lot of them came back here to San Diego.
But you have to remember, it was war. We were all scared spitless. We didn't know what was going to happen. And another thing that they don't talk about, those Japanese kids went to our schools 5 days a week. Every Saturday they went to Japanese school. Every summer, some member of the family went to Japan. And there was
Many of them for military training,
we
which
think
was
we don't
required.
know. We don't know. We don't
Banzai.
know. We don't know that. But the girls went to Japan, and the boys went to Japan, and what they did, we never knew and never particularly cared about finding out. But when this all happens, well, then you suddenly remember, what were they doing in Japan?
Right.
You know, and you do become concerned.
Was there any opposition to it that you remember? Was there any that
No.
may have been asking to get yourself shot or something to oppose that?
Yeah.
Well, it never occurred to us.
I don't remember any opposition. The government decided that this was necessary and they should know more than we do about it. I think was the attitude of most of us.
Well, not only that, but they also said it was for their own protection.
Well, that may have been the case in a lot of places.
You know, that was Earl Warren that signed that into law. I forget. It was official order RX-12, whatever. And later Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren signed that into law.
When he was governor?
Okay, war starts, everybody goes nuts, and previously the isolation attitude is dead, right? It's gone. And was the attitude to go get them?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone. From old ladies to little kids.
And so Japan, though, since they were allies, it was the enemy of my enemy is my enemy, right? And Japan was allied with the Nazis and Mussolini, so the idea idea was it to finally go help England and France? Because they had been getting,
I don't think so. They've been getting lots of help from us before that.
no, but not.
England has been getting the help.
Yes, ships and armaments and stuff.
Should we check that and
Okay.
put on that next
Yeah,
one?
it's
'Cause I
just
think
about
we're
time.
just about over.
I think, didn't Germany declare war on us?
I don't know.
I
I don't know.
forget.
Well, you've got 7 minutes more if you want to go to the end.
Let's go to the end and we'll time it. Sure, let's go. I don't know if Germany declared war or what. I'm not sure what the history is on that. I assume that America would have declared war on the next day on Japan and everybody who had ever been associated with Japan. So I assume it would have been on the entire axis.
Well, everyone went to work, and it was from then on, and women haven't quit working since.
Well, that's my next item. Women in the workforce. How was?
Yeah.
I mean, did you go work, or I know you didn't serve at all. You
No,
have a family.
Yeah.
it's partly because of the family, but I had
You
had
were
an
older,
ice cream
too.
store. Yeah, I was probably on the upper edge of the ones you see that were going. But we had this ice cream store, and before the war started, we'd gotten a contract with Roar Aircraft Corporation. So we were in a vital industry at the time. We were feeding all of the fellows working down at Roar.
Right.
And they just automatically granted us a deferment.
So if you had been, working at the gas station,
You'd have been
In
gone.
In spite of the family.
yeah.
Later.
I probably would.
You wouldn't have been.
Later on.
Yeah, because you were about 28 or 29 years old then.
Yeah,
And
I
that's-
was 20 years old.
Yeah.
What about with the family?
Family made a
Notwithstanding.
difference.
Yeah,
Yeah, family made a difference.
Yeah, we had 3 kids.
Sure.
And to go back to the Japanese, for just an aside, you might be interested in this. Pop came home and after Pearl Harbor, and he put a loaded revolver. We had a little wall safe in our wall safe, and he told me and a big stack of dollar bills, and he told me that if anything happened, if there were any parachutists or any ships coming in, I was to put the boys in the car and I was to head for my mother's and father's ranch in Arizona.
Leave all that money for me?
No, not to worry about you. You told me not to worry about you.
I know.
No, don't try to find me. Don't think about me. You just
I
go.
know, but the money and the gun were for you and your protection and your livelihood over in Arizona or
Wherever, yeah.
Mm.
So,
So it was that
yeah.
kind of paranoia.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
We didn't know what was going to happen. They might, the same fleet that bombed, they suffered almost no damage when they bombed.
Right.
And they could come onto the coast, and we expected them to.
They could have, if they'd known. They didn't know that.
They didn't know what.
They didn't know
They
that we were
couldn't.
wide open.
So wasn't there were bases in San Diego, or they were minor installations?
Well, there were some bases, yes, but most of the warships were out at Hawaii. They destroyed practically the whole blooming Navy.
Why?
They could have come with assault ships and ships. They could have landed on
They could
any of the beaches.
Almost
Encinitas, Carlsbad, up and down, Santa Barbara, all over.
Why was the military in Hawaii in the first place? For a show of strength against that sort of invasion?
You see, Japan was already at war against a lot of nations around it. And they knew that Japan wanted to extend the war. And they didn't dream that they could come out and attack the fleet at Pearl Harbor. And so most of the fleet was right there, just in that harbor. Protected area, you see. Nobody could get to them. And they were going to protect the coast of the United States by preventing this armada of Japanese. It's almost unbelievable now with the communication systems that we've got. They couldn't do it now, I'm sure.
Well, I watched quite a few of the shows recently on TV a month ago about all this. It was very bizarre. It's very difficult for me to to comprehend that sort of attack, because I grew up with America was untouchable, absolutely untouchable.
Well, but Americans were also honorable, and they wouldn't make a sneak attack like that. I don't believe.
No, we wouldn't do the first strike.
Call them up
They'd
first.
be warned.
Yeah, I would say.
Call them out, right? Like, hey, buddy.
Yeah.
One of those.
Well, now we've got all these satellites, you see, these
Sure.
spy
It's
satellites.
very difficult to
Yeah.
make a move.
That's it. Okay.
Yep. See, we're blinking on there right now. That might have just shut off.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Is it blinking? Yeah, well, that means that
What does it say in there?
it's getting near the end. It's 58. Okay. Next time we need to get you in more full. I turned it a little bit.
Well, I'm not. I'm just a voice here.
Well, not
I'm just,
necessarily.
I'm just-
Okay.